Okay, finish up or to do chapter 5. We don't have to cover that many things since we've covered several things already. Hold on. So what I have here is the outline we looked at in class. We're going to talk about hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, just a teeny bit of review for gestational diabetes, and a little bit on these topics, the multifetal pregnancies, HIV, eating disorders, fetal alcohol, and adolescent pregnancy. So it's a lot to cover, but these are the conditions of pregnancy that can lead to health issues. So that's always the second chapter in this textbook looks at the conditions of illness. So this one, hypertensive disorders. So we know what hypertension is. We talked about that in the quiz, and you can see that the blood pressure categories have changed so that now they have stage 1 and stage 2. So stage 1 is 130 over 180, that's the low end of it. Stage 2 is 140 over 90, what we used to call stage 1. So it's just kind of moved to a different category. Normal is 120 over 80. Elevated is 120 up to 129 over 80. Then your true hypertension begins at 130. So this is important because women that are pregnant need to be checked their blood pressure before they're pregnant if possible, and certainly early in their pregnancy so you can catch any drastic changes. The increase in hypertension has gone and mirrored along with the increase in obesity and diabetes. So we're going to see a lot more. And we mentioned in class that some of the maternal mortality causes are cardiovascular. So this also affects not just cardio but cerebral vascular health, this hypertension. So this one next slide talks about the chronic hypertension, gestational hypertension, and preeclampsia. So chronic would be something where you actually come into your pregnancy with hypertension. Gestational means you get hypertension during your pregnancy, usually after the 20th week. And then preeclampsia is other symptoms that accompany the hypertension. So it's not hypertension alone. So we have here the hypertension disorders. One of the things that we'll notice is inflammation, oxidative stress, and damage. Mainly it's just damage to the blood vessels. All the pressure of the blood can easily stretch out or damage and then cause plaque buildup later on, which then leads to cardiovascular illnesses or cerebral illnesses. So here we have, because of this damage and this dysfunction to the endothelial cells, there's impaired blood flow, tendency to have blood clot, and this plaque formation. So these are the things that can happen, which is sort of like in the same way we're trying to prevent obesity because it leads to diabetes. We're trying to prevent hypertension because it leads to these blood impairments. And especially when you think about pregnancy, there's a lot more going on with blood flow, so it's even more dangerous. So the ways to reduce this oxidative stress is physical activity, lots of phytochemicals, and vitamin D. Those are the three that are mentioned here. So chronic hypertension is that which we mentioned we see before the 20-week period. You may come into a pregnancy or you just get it very early in pregnancy so that we basically have it throughout the whole pregnancy. More common in African Americans, those that are obese, if you're an older mother, or if you have a history of hypertension with previous pregnancies. And the reason we're worried about it besides the health of the mother is just the baby's more likely to be preterm or small for gestational age, retarded growth, which is a small for gestational age, and placenta abruption. It's really important to have a healthy placenta. Remember all the blood vessels in that organ. If there's any kind of leakage, then we can have other organ damage. And you'll have a higher incidence of cesarean delivery. So the nutritional interventions also would be trying to get the balanced diet, weight gain, not reducing sodium, but just getting blood pressure under control. And there are some medications that are safe during pregnancy. So gestational then is that which we pick up. We pick up the hypertension later after the 20th week without any other symptoms. You don't see protein in the urine. you just see a higher blood pressure. But the tendency is that people have women that have gestational hypertension likely are 25% of them will be develop into preeclampsia, which is more dangerous. So preeclampsia, what that is just that it's a failure of the normal development of the maternal fetal interface in the placenta. So basically the placenta is the high point of blood movement and nutrient transfer. So if that's not working correctly, then we have these other issues. So preeclampsia is going to be high blood pressure accompanied with protein. So they can check for protein. You can check a 24-hour urine excretion. You can look at how much protein is released after 24 hours, or you can do a quick spot check and you can see even just in one urine sample if there's protein spilling into the urine, which would be abnormal. And then eclampsia, which is the next stage of preeclampsia. And eclampsia means lightning, so it's something that comes very quickly, and that is accompanied with a seizure, not just high blood pressure, not just protein in the urine, but now you've got seizures that start with like a disturbed visual acuity and nausea, and then having these seizures. So this is pretty serious because then we can develop organ damage and so forth. And preeclampsia can occur. It's not just at around greater than 20 weeks gestation, but up to 2 days after delivery of the baby. So it doesn't end necessarily at delivery of the baby, but the best treatment for preeclampsia is delivering the placenta. The placenta seems to be the problem if it's not developed properly during the pregnancy, that it's the thing that has to be removed before the symptoms can go away. So usually when someone has these symptoms, they have to decide at what point is it going to be safe to deliver the baby, which is the best treatment, and at what point is the mother's life at risk. So we have to balance whether we're going to lose the mother or lose the baby or keep them both. So it's all about timing. So the risk for preeclampsia we already mentioned, as older women, more than one child, twins or triplets, central obesity or underweight. So it's again the underweight, overweight dichotomy. Different ethnic groups are more likely to get preeclampsia. The history of preeclampsia, insulin resistance. If you have chronic hypertension, even if it's not gestational, you also have a higher risk for preeclampsia. Poor vitamin D and calcium status. They have found that just getting enough calcium can reduce the risk of getting preeclampsia. So if you're deficient in calcium, you have a higher incidence of possibility of getting it. And then a diet that's inflammatory. A lot of omega-6s, a lot of refined foods can lead to this higher risk. So what's going on then is just if the placenta and the blood vessels are not correctly or developed well, then there's less oxygen that can go into the blood. You have more inflammatory factors, which can damage the endothelial cells of your lining of your blood vessels, hardening the cells, and then leaking can occur. So not just water, but protein can leak out of the cells into your blood and then damage other organs. So that people that have this proteinuria may also have other organ damage. So the characteristics you might see, the symptoms would be headaches, nausea, visual problems we've mentioned, blood clots, more insulin resistance, inflammation. So all these symptoms. Now, it's not always true that just because you have hypertension and proteinuria that you're going to get eclampsia. And sometimes eclampsia occurs without preeclampsia. Just out of nowhere, you'll have seizures and you'll have extremely high blood pressure just in a matter of a day. So they're finding there's non-traditional or unexpected symptoms too that can occur. It's not always a nice movement from preeclampsia to eclampsia. Sometimes this occurs apart from this. So they're trying to make sure that people are screened for preeclampsia. They have better ways of screening them early to see if they have a higher risk for getting that. So the outcomes, of course, for the mother, it's renal and liver problems. Placenta abruption means the breakdown of the placenta. The newborn can be preterm, have respiratory distress, or could die. And then the recommendations are, again, adequate calcium and vitamin D because that helps the calcium. Again, multivitamins and minerals are essential. A diet that's colorful vegetables, extra fiber, exercise, and proper weight gain. So those are the symptoms, and that's the story behind the preeclampsia. The other condition that we were going to briefly mention was diabetes, which we've covered already. So remember that there are these 3 forms of diabetes. That someone could have gestational diabetes, which means they get diabetes during their pregnancy. They might come in to pregnancy with type 2 or type 1 diabetes. This means, of course, they have to have insulin, and this type 2 means they probably need to take insulin at least during the pregnancy, or they can take medication to control their blood sugar. So we've already gone through that to some degree earlier. Another thing just to remember, the management of gestational is that you want to lower the blood glucose with a lower calorie intake, not a diet, but just maintain blood glucose as best you can so you don't have elevated ketones where your body's trying to produce energy somehow because of the insulin resistance, or you can take medication. And then another management for gestational is just, again, exercise is really important, not too quick of a weight gain, watching blood glucose and ketones, and then following up after pregnancy to make sure they don't move into a type 2 diabetic situation. And then we just want to mention the type 1 diabetes. Don't forget, this is the most risky condition, more than the other types of diabetes, because the mother is at risk for ketosis, getting too many ketones, and that could cause breakdown of some of her organs. It can lead to hypertension, and it's more dangerous for the child as well, and the infant as well. So we want to monitor closely their pregnancy, the blood sugar levels, and the ketones. You measure the ketones in their urine to make sure they're not too high. If you have multifetal pregnancies, there's nothing particularly, just you have to eat. You can eat more. Your weight gain should be more. It's becoming more common as we've had reproductive technologies to allow for twins. There's a monozygotic or dizygotic, depending how the eggs are fertilized. That's not particularly important, but there are different types of twins I'm sure you're aware of. The risks for the mother, again, higher risk for preeclampsia, anemia, gestational diabetes, hypertension, placenta previa. All these conditions so there's a risk in all the situations that are greater than if you don't have twins. And the weight gain for twins is up to 54 pounds, a recommendation, depending on how you start out your pregnancy. And then the other conditions could be HIV. We mentioned briefly that if you're pregnant with HIV, I think the book mentioned that you need to make sure you're not anemic, make sure you have proper iron, but not too much. Realize that you have increased infection, so you want to make sure vitamin A is adequate, but not in excess, because they don't believe the infections really affect the outcome of the pregnancy, but to maintain your health, it's very important to have a basic diet with all the necessary multivitamins. The goals would be keeping your calories up, essential fatty acids. We already mentioned these, and then particularly food safe handling practices, because you don't want any kind of food-borne illness can be much more dangerous for someone with HIV. I think we'll hear about this later, but eating disorders is rare in pregnancy only because it's hard to get pregnant, and you're usually not even fertile if you're too underweight. So the only situation is more likely that bulimic might become pregnant, but you'll see both situations occurring. And then that could affect also the health of the placenta and lead into the difficulties with preeclampsia as well. Fetal alcohol is just a warning. This would be a warning to mothers not to drink alcohol during pregnancy because of this being the leading preventable cause of birth defects. So of course it's something to highly educate. And then if you have an adolescent who is pregnant, realizing that the teen growth and height and weight, that's going to be possibly at the expense of the fetus. So making sure that both the mother and baby get plenty of calories and nutrients. And there's just a piece here about the risks for the pregnant teens, possible low birth weight, preeclampsia, again, anemia, the same kind of things you've seen before. And last but not least is the recommendations for the adolescents, just making sure their calorie is nutrient-dense foods and their calcium is higher. It's 1,300 as opposed to 1,000 milligrams. So those are the special conditions of pregnancy, and we'll see you in class. Thank you.